Now let me be clear about something. The Galactic Academy of Unified Warfare Studies, fondly known as GAUS among its students, or less fondly known as the place where young soldiers go to either become legends or become cautionary tales, had a very specific reputation across 47 star systems. It was not a gentle place. The faculty did not believe in gentle. The curriculum did not believe in gentle. And Commandant Vril Osa, a 7-foot Drakari with 4 arms and a philosophy degree she never used, absolutely, categorically, did not believe in gentle. So when Cadet Petir Solano, 3rd year top-ranked in his cohort, son of a Federated Systems admiral and possessed of a jaw so perfectly structured it practically filed its own applications, decided that the best use of his Tuesday morning was to publicly humiliate the new human transfer student in front of 200 watching cadets. Nobody intervened, not because they wanted to see her suffer. Well, okay. Some of them wanted to see her suffer, but mostly because intervention was not something Gauss cadets did. You watched, you learned, and if someone got taken apart in the sparring circle, you filed that lesson somewhere in the back of your brain, and you did not forget it. The human's name was Corporal Nadia Voss. She had arrived at Gauss 14 days earlier, transferred from the Earth Defense Initiative's Accelerated Combat Program, a program that, I should mention, has a 42% dropout rate in the first month, and a reputation for producing either exceptional soldiers or people with very specific sleep disorders. She was 23 years old. She was 168 centimeters tall. She weighed, by Petir's very vocal estimate, approximately nothing. He had said this loudly to his friends in the mess hall 3 days ago. She had been 6 tables away. She had heard him. She had looked up from her food, looked directly at him, and then looked back down and continued eating. That, somehow, had made it worse. Petir Solano was not accustomed to being looked through. He was accustomed to being responded to. He was accustomed to fear, or admiration, or at minimum the basic decency of a visible reaction. What he was not accustomed to was being assessed, found uninteresting, and dismissed, all in the span of 3 seconds, by someone who came up to his collarbone. So here we were, Tuesday morning, Combat Form and Application, Section 7, Instructor Barokesh presiding, a Shen warrior who had 3 confirmed kills before his own military enrollment, and had once dislocated a training dummy's simulated shoulder joint so hard it became a required reading case study. 200 cadets arranged in a rough oval around the central mat, and Petir Solano standing in the middle of it, arms loose at his sides, wearing the expression of someone who had already written the ending to this story. Voss Barokesh called. "You're up. I want you to understand something about Drakari Shen hybrid sparring formats, because this matters. The Gauss combat rotation is not a sport. It is not a points system. It is a structured observation of how you respond to a threat that is larger, faster, and specifically prepared to dismantle you. The pairings are not random." Barokesh had been watching Petir's behavior for days. Whether this was punitive or educational was, honestly, a matter of perspective. Nadia Voss walked to the mat. She was wearing standard-issue training clothes, dart gray, no modification, no personal insignia, nothing that marked her as anything in particular except a regulation cadet. Her hair was pulled back. Her expression was, and I want to be precise here, completely, absolutely neutral. Not nervous neutral. Not forced calm neutral. The kind of neutral that has made a decision and is waiting for everyone else to catch up. Petir rolled his neck. There was an audible pop. Several cadets near the front winced. He was 6 feet 4 inches of military conditioning, trained in 4 combat disciplines, and he had placed second in the All-Academy Invitational last year, second only because the cadet who beat him had since been recruited into a classified tactical unit that officially didn't exist. He smiled at her. "No hard feelings," he said pleasantly. "I just need you to understand what you transferred into." Nadia looked at him. "Okay," she said. "That was it? Just okay?" Petir's smile flickered. Just for a moment. Then it returned, wider, and he settled into his opening stance. the Drakari forward weight position, designed to generate maximum ground force for a closing strike, optimized for dealing with opponents of lesser mass. Barokesh raised one hand, dropped it. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. I am going to describe it in significantly more detail than that, because those 4 seconds contain more information than most cadets acquire in a semester. Petir moved first. Of course he did. He had range advantage, and he knew it. A long linear drive forward designed to establish grip and control, the kind of opening that had worked on 40-some opponents in practice and competition. It was fast. It was technically correct. It was exactly what the Drakari forward weight stance telegraphed, which was a feature, not a bug, because the point was overwhelming force, not surprise. When you can bench press a small vehicle, you do not need to be subtle. Nadia did not step back. She stepped in, not to the side, not the lateral deflection that the stance was optimized to counter, but directly forward and slightly inside his reach, closing the distance before his grip could establish, and she dropped her weight in a very specific way that I can only describe as deliberate wrongness, like watching a building decide to fall sideways instead of down. Her right arm came up not to block but to redirect, catching the inside of his leading forearm and turning his own momentum. All that beautifully generated ground force out and away from her center line. His balance shifted. A centimeter. Maybe 2. That was enough. She moved through the gap his imbalance created with the kind of unhurried speed that doesn't look fast until you realize it's already finished. Her left hand finding the back of his elbow, her hip position changing, her whole body becoming a lever point. And Petir Solano, 110 kilograms of highly trained military cadet, left the ground. Not dramatically, not in a spinning cinematic arc. He simply went. His center of mass relocated from above his feet to somewhere that his feet were not, and the mat came up to meet him with a sound that the watching cadets would describe, later, in varying terms, but that all contained some version of the word "oh." He was face down. Her knee was at the back of his, her weight distributed in a way that had removed his ability to push up. Her right hand applying pressure to his shoulder at an angle that made the joint's continued comfort entirely contingent on his cooperation. 4 seconds. The oval was silent, not the performative silence of watching something expected. The silence of 200 cadets simultaneously updating their internal models of what was possible. Petir made a sound. It was involuntary. It was also fairly undignified. "Yield," Barokesh said. "Yield," Petir said, through the mat. Nadia stood up. She straightened her training top. She walked back to her position in the observer line, and stood there with the same expression she'd had since she walked out, that flat, patient, already decided calm, and did not look around for reactions. She didn't need to. The reactions were happening. In the second row, Cadet Irene Pal, a Shen second year who had been taking quiet notes on Nadia since the transfer, leaned over to her training partner and said something in a low voice. Her training partner, a stocky Federate named Oswin Drek, who had previously considered himself fairly comfortable in his own combat rankings, watched Nadia standing in line and said, also quietly, "What program did she say she came from?" "She didn't," Irene said. "I looked it up." And the Asan thaw of the a pause. "I found 3 words," Irene said. "Earth Defense Initiative. That's the name. That's all I found. 3 words and a clearance requirement." Oswin looked at Nadia. Nadia was watching Barokesh call the next pair. She looked like someone waiting for a bus. "Ha," Oswin said. On the mat, Petir was getting up. His training aide offered a hand. He did not take it. He stood on his own, adjusted his uniform, and stood at parade rest, which, I will say, was the correct instinct. Whatever else Petir Solano was, he had been raised by a military family, and he understood that the worst thing you could do after a defeat was perform the defeat twice by showing how much it had affected you. He looked at the back of Nadia's head. She did not turn around. Barokesh wrote something on his assessment board. He wrote for a long time. Then he looked up and said, "Next pair." Drek, Calder, you're up. Class continued. The thing about Gauss, the thing that made it different from the dozens of other military academies scattered across the federated systems, was that it did not permit the luxury of a singular event. You didn't get to be defined by one moment, good or bad. The training cycles were designed to produce constant reevaluation. Yesterday's performance was yesterday's performance, and today you were expected to perform today, which was as Petier sat through the afternoon's tactical theory session staring at the same projected diagram he'd been looking at for 40 minutes, doing absolutely nothing to make him feel better. He was not, he told himself, embarrassed. He was recalibrating. The technique she had used, he'd been running it back in his head since the mat, trying to break it into components, and he could identify the pieces, but the sequence was wrong by every framework he'd trained in. The entry angle was too close. The weight distribution was too low. The whole thing operated on a mechanical principle he did not have a name for because it did not appear in any of his coursework. He pulled up the Academy database on his personal terminal, searched Earth Defense Initiative Combat Curriculum. The database returned 2 results. One was an equipment requisition form dated 9 years ago. One was a personnel transfer notification that contained Nadia's name and Academy registration number and nothing else. No program details, no performance metrics, no training history, no specialty designations. He stared at this for a moment. Then he searched EDI Accelerated Combat. 0 results. He sat back. Across the theory hall, Nadia was taking notes. Actual handwritten notes. In a small notebook she carried everywhere. Not a terminal, not a data pad. A physical notebook with a physical pen, which was, as far as most of the academy was concerned, deeply eccentric behavior from someone who was apparently already surprising enough. Irene, sitting 2 rows behind her, was watching the notes and trying to determine if she was writing in a language anyone here would recognize. She was. It was standard Federate script. The notes were, from what Irene could read at this distance, detailed and organized and included small diagrams with force vectors. So, not eccentric, methodical. That was somehow more unsettling. After theory, there was a 40-minute open period before evening formation. Petier spent it in the training annex running the same combination sequence against a practice form, adjusting the variable on the entry step. His training aide, a loyal 3rd year named Kassen Mura, who had been with him since 1st year, and who possessed the specific skill set of knowing when to talk and when to be quiet, was quiet. Petier ran the sequence, adjusted, ran it again. "You're still loading the front foot too early," said a voice from the doorway. He stopped. Nadia Voss was leaning against the doorframe. She had her notebook in one hand. She was looking at his footwork with the expression of someone reviewing a moderately interesting piece of paperwork. "The Drakari drive works at range," she said. "You're executing it correctly at range, but you're preloading the front foot before you've confirmed contact. That's where the weight transfer happens, and that's where it comes apart." Petier looked at her for a long moment. "You came to give me notes," he said. "I came to use the annex," she said, and held up her notebook as though this explained everything. "The observation is free." He was quiet. She walked past him to the far side of the annex and set her notebook on the equipment ledge and began, without further comment, a warm-up sequence that Kassen Mura watched with growing attention because the first 2 movements were recognizable, standard Federation protocol, and then the 3rd one wasn't, and by the 4th one Kassen had quietly stopped what he was doing. "What is that?" Kassen asked. "Conditioning," Nadia said, without breaking rhythm. "For what?" She paused, considered the question with what appeared to be genuine deliberation. "Everything," she said, and continued. Petier, watching, felt something shift in the architecture of his certainty. Not collapse, not crumble, but shift. The way a structure shifts when it encounters a load it wasn't designed for, and responds not by failing but by redistributing. He had come into this morning intending to establish a hierarchy. What he had established, instead, was a question, and the question, watching Nadia Voss move through a combat conditioning sequence that had no name in any database he could access, in an annex at Gauss, with the patient efficiency of someone for whom this was simply a Tuesday, was this. What exactly had the Earth Defense Initiative been doing, and why didn't anyone outside of Earth know? Petir did not sleep well that night. This was unusual for him. He was the kind of person who slept with the deliberate efficiency of someone who had scheduled rest as a performance variable. 8 hours, no exceptions, wake up optimized. His father had drilled this into him before he could read. Sleep is a weapon, Petir. Use it. Tonight, the weapon was malfunctioning. He lay on his bunk in the dark and stared at the ceiling and ran the 4 seconds on the mat through his head for what was probably the 11th time. And for the 11th time he arrived at the same conclusion, which was that he still could not fully explain what had happened to him mechanically. He understood the components. He had identified the entry angle, the redirection principle, the weight transfer, the lever application. He could name them individually. What he could not do was explain why the sequence worked at that speed, at that distance, against that size differential, with that level of reliability. Because it shouldn't have been reliable. It required too many precise variables to land simultaneously, and yet it had landed cleanly, without apparent effort, as though the variables were not uncertain at all but simply known, like she had already calculated the outcome before the match started. That thought was not comfortable. Down the corridor, in the single occupancy transfer quarters that Gauss assigned to cadets who arrived mid-cycle, Nadia Voss was also awake. She was not staring at the ceiling. She was sitting cross-legged on her bunk with her notebook open on her knee, writing in the dim glow of her personal lamp, the pen moving in quick, economical strokes. The notebook was almost full. This was her 3rd notebook since arriving at Gauss. She went through them quickly. She had a habit of writing down everything she observed, not because she needed to, but because the act of translation, converting observation into language, was itself a processing tool, something an instructor at the EDI program had taught her in the 2nd month. Before the program stopped being a thing she could describe to outsiders, she wrote, Drockery forward weight drive. Preloads front foot before contact confirmation. Pattern is consistent, not situational. Adjustment window is approximately 0.3 seconds from initiation. Counter entry viable at 0.7 reach ratio or below. She paused, wrote, He's going to try to understand it. That's fine. Paused again, wrote, They all do. She closed the notebook and turned off the lamp and lay down and was asleep in 4 minutes. The morning brought PT, which at Gauss meant a 6-kilometer run over the Academy's terrain course, followed by a strength rotation that had been designed, according to institutional legend, by a Shen general who had personally declared that comfort was a philosophical error. The cadets ran in their cohort groups. Nadia ran with Section 7. Petir ran near the front. He always ran near the front. It was a positioning instinct. Be visible, be ahead, establish pace. Nadia ran in the middle of the pack, not because she couldn't run at the front. Irin Paul, who had by this point developed what she privately admitted was a somewhat research-oriented interest in the human transfer, had clocked Nadia's pace on the 2nd kilometer and done a quick mental calculation and arrived at a conclusion that made her run slightly faster, for no reason she could articulate. Nadia was running at approximately 70%. Irene had been running at 95%. She filed this information carefully and said nothing. At the 4th kilometer, the terrain course introduced its signature feature, a hill that the Academy officially called Gradient 7, and that cadets called several other things, none of them printable in official documentation. It was steep enough that the first years always lost formation on it, and steep enough that even experienced cadets showed their conditioning on the way up, the pack spreading as the stronger runners pulled ahead, and the ones who had been coasting on flatland speed fell behind. Petir hit the hill and drove. He was good on hills. He had the leg strength and the will, and he used both. His pace barely dropping, his form clean. Nadia hit the hill, and her pace did not change. Not slightly changed, not adjusted. The same pace, the same cadence, the same economical stride, up a gradient that was making half the section visibly work for it. And she didn't appear to be working. She appeared to be doing the same thing she had been doing on flat ground, as though the hill had not received the relevant memo about being difficult. Oswin Drek, who was working the hill hard and knew it, glanced sideways at her as she came even with him, not passing, just maintaining, and said through labored breathing, How are you? It's the stride angle, she said, not at all breathlessly. Shorter stride, more hip. The hill doesn't cost more if you don't fight it. Oswin stared at her. She crested the hill and ran down the other side. Oswin finished the hill 20 seconds later and spent the 5th kilometer thinking about that. He arrived at formation afterward, still thinking about it, and immediately went to Irene and said, "She explained it to me, like it was obvious, like everyone should know." What did she explain? Hill mechanics. Irene was quiet for a moment. "The thing is," Irene said carefully, "I looked up the EDI program again last night, not the Academy database. External search. And I found a journal article," Irene said, "from a Federation Xenobiology review, published about 6 years ago. It was about human physiological adaptations, and it had one paragraph about military training programs, and the paragraph said, and I'm paraphrasing, that certain Earth-based advanced training programs had begun incorporating conditioning methodologies derived from the study of human stress response optimization under sustained adverse conditions." Oswin waited. "That's it?" he said. "That's the paragraph," Irene said. "One paragraph, in a xenobiology journal, about physiology. The military application is one sentence in a paper about something else. What does that mean?" Irene looked across the formation yard to where Nadia was standing at ease, notebook in hand, writing something down. "I think it means," Irene said slowly, "that whatever they're doing in there, they're not advertising it." The week continued. Barokesh's combat rotation moved through its scheduled pairings, and Nadia was matched against 4 more opponents across the week. A Shen second year named Kale Das, who was fast and knew it, a Federate heavy-build cadet named Tura Wen, who had approximately 40 kilograms on her, and a ground-fighting specialty, a Drakari named Sevek Par, who had actual combat deployment experience and carried himself accordingly, and a late addition to the rotation, Petir Solano, again on Friday, which Barokesh announced without emphasis, and which the section received with the particular attention of cadets who had learned something from Tuesday and wanted to learn more. Kale Das lost in 6 seconds. He was fast, yes, she was faster, and more importantly, she had watched him spar 3 times before their pairing, and she used his speed against him in a way that left him sitting on the mat with an expression of genuine philosophical confusion. Tura Wen lasted longer, 22 seconds, which the section noted as significant, and the match looked, for about 15 of those seconds, like it might genuinely go another way, because Tura got a hold, and Tura's holds were things of terrible beauty, the kind of grip strength that could reshape sheet metal. She got both arms around Nadia's midsection from behind and began to apply the compression that had won her 14 matches this year, and then Nadia did something with her elbow and her hip and the position of her feet that should not, geometrically, have worked. And Tura was no longer holding anything, and a half-second after that she was on the mat and Nadia was beside her, applying a shoulder lock with the dispassionate focus of someone filing paperwork. Tura tapped out. She lay on the mat afterward for a moment, staring upward. "That hurt," she said, with what sounded like academic interest. "Yes," Nadia agreed. "The angle's not natural. That's why it works." Sevek Par was different. Sevek Par had been deployed. He had seen actual violence, not simulated violence, and there was a quality to how he moved that cadets who had only ever trained recognized intellectually, but did not fully understand, a quality of zero performance, no presentation, pure function. He looked at Nadia when Barokesh called their pairing, and he nodded at her, once, which was not something he had done for any other opponent. She nodded back. That match lasted 41 seconds, and it was not clean, not surgical, not the elegant mechanical disassembly that the earlier matches had been. Sevek Par adapted in real time. When she used the entry angle that had finished Petir, he didn't provide the weight transfer she needed, and when she adjusted, he adjusted with her. And there was a period in the middle of those 41 seconds where both of them were working, genuinely working, in a way the section watched with absolute silence. She won. Barely. By a margin of inches and a decision point at the 38th second where she found an angle that wasn't there, and then was, briefly, because she had maneuvered him into providing it without him noticing, until it was already closing. Sevek Par sat up, rolled his neck, looked at her. "EDI," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," she said. He nodded again. Slower this time. Like someone confirming a hypothesis they'd held for a while. "I was briefed on your program once," he said. 3 years ago. Deployment prep. The briefing officer mentioned it as context for operating alongside human units. The section was extremely still. "What did the briefing say?" Nadia asked. Sevek Par almost smiled. "That the program exists, that its graduates have a specific profile, and that if we were ever in a situation where we doubted whether to follow a human EDI graduate's tactical call, we should not doubt." He stood up and walked back to the line. The section processed this for the remainder of the day. By Friday's pairing with Petir, something had changed in the structure of the section's attention. Monday's crowd had been here to watch a humiliation. Friday's crowd was here to watch something else. They weren't sure what, exactly, but the week had redefined what they were looking at. And they knew it. Petir knew it too. He had spent the week thinking, which was not what he usually spent weeks doing in the lead-up to a rematch. Usually he spent weeks training. He had trained too, but the thinking had taken up more space than he expected, because the question he'd arrived at on Tuesday night, what had the EDI been doing, and why didn't anyone outside Earth know, had not let go of him. He had found 3 more references in external searches. A logistics report that mentioned EDI graduate deployment integration, a brief medical study on human stress hormone profiles under sustained high-intensity conditions that included a footnote referencing advanced military training populations, and a single sentence in a decommissioned tactical assessment from 8 years ago that said, plainly, without context, EDI program outputs are not comparable to standard Federation combat training benchmarks, and should not be assessed using those frameworks. Not comparable. Not better or worse. Not ranked. Just not comparable. As though the frameworks themselves were the wrong tool. He stood on the mat across from her on Friday, and he looked at her and he said, quietly, not for the crowd, for her, "I've been trying to understand it all week." She looked back at him. "I know," she said. "The technique, the sequence. I can identify the components, but not why it works at speed," she said. He paused. Yes, she was quiet for a moment with that flat, considering look, and then she said something that the cadets closest to the mat would repeat to others later, in the mess hall and the dormitory corridors and the quiet before lights out, because it was the kind of sentence that stuck. "It works because it was built for this," she said. "Not for your size, not for your training, not for what you're likely to do, for this specific moment, with these specific variables which I calculated before I walked onto the mat." He stared at her. "Before?" he said. "Observation is a discipline," she said. "I've been watching you since I arrived. Your patterns, your preferences, your instincts under pressure. By the time Barokesh called my name, I already knew what you were going to do." The section was perfectly silent. Petir thought about Tuesday, about the 4 seconds, about the complete absence of hesitation or adjustment in her response to his opening move. "You knew," he said. "Before the match." "I always know before the match," she said. "That's what they teach us." And there it was. Not arrogance. She said it the same way she said everything, flat and patient and factual. Not a boast, a description. Barokesh raised his hand. "Dropped it." This match lasted longer than Tuesday's. Not because she was less prepared, but because Petir had done something Tuesday's Petir had not done, which was abandon his pattern. He did not load the front foot early. He did not open with the Drakari drive. He came in at an angle he'd never used in competition, deliberately formless, trying to present her with variables she hadn't calculated. It worked for approximately 8 seconds. Because here is the thing about being human that the galaxy, even now, even after all of it, keeps failing to account for. They do not only calculate before, they calculate during, constantly, reflexively, the way most species breathe, an uninterrupted real-time revision of probability, a running update of the model, so that what begins as prediction becomes adaptation so fast the distinction stops mattering. He shifted his angle. She revised. He changed his grip position. She revised. He pulled back and created distance, trying to reset, and she let him, because she was already working on the next version of the sequence, and by the time he moved again she was 3 adjustments ahead of where he was, and she walked through the gap between his intentions and his execution, like it was a door she had already unlocked. 13 seconds. The mat, his shoulder under controlled pressure. Yield, he said. She stood. Adjusted her training top. This time, she looked at him as he rose. You adapted, she said. Tuesday you didn't. That's real progress. He looked at her. At the absolute sincerity with which she said it. No performance, no condescension, just the same flat honesty she applied to everything. What does progress look like? He asked. Against you. She considered this. Longer, she said. And then one day, not losing. She picked up her notebook from the equipment ledge where she'd set it before the match, tucked it under her arm. That's how it worked for us at the EDI. You lose, and you lose, and you lose, and every time you lose you're a little less wrong. Until eventually you're right more than you're wrong, and then you're ready. Ready for what? Irene asked from the line. She hadn't meant to say it aloud. It came out anyway. Nadia looked at her. Then at the assembled section. All of them watching, the question hanging over 200 cadets in the particular silence of people who understood they were on the edge of information that mattered. Nadia did not answer immediately. She turned the notebook over in her hands once. Then she said, whatever comes next, and that was it. No elaboration. No dramatic pause held for effect. She tucked the notebook more firmly under her arm and walked out of the training annex into the afternoon light, and the section watched her go, and nobody said anything for a while. Petier stood in the center of the mat and thought about the briefing Sevek Par had mentioned, the instruction to not doubt a tactical call from an EDI graduate. He thought about the journal article Irene had found, the one paragraph buried in a paper about physiology. He thought about the database that returned nothing, the clearance requirements, the 3 words and a wall of silence. He thought about 4 seconds on Tuesday and 13 seconds on Friday, and the fact that she had told him, without any apparent hesitation, that she had known what he was going to do before he did it, and the fact that he believed her completely. The galaxy was a large place. It contained species that could reshape gravity, organisms that communicated across star systems, civilizations that had been building things longer than Earth had been cooling from its formation. And somehow, from somewhere in the middle of all of that, from one small planet with a concerning relationship with conflict and a program that didn't appear in any database, and a training philosophy that operated outside every framework the Federation used to measure such things, came people who looked like Nadia Voss, unremarkable in a corridor, quietly lethal on a mat, watching everything, writing it down, already 3 moves ahead before the opening move. Petier Solano walked off the mat, and he did not think about humiliation, and he did not think about hierarchy. He thought, I need to watch her more. And then, more quietly, the thought that he did not say aloud, but that sat in the back of his mind for the rest of the semester. Through every training session and every tactical theory class, and every morning run over Gradient 7, whatever the Earth Defense Initiative is building, I am very glad they are building it for our side. In her quarters that evening, Nadia opened her notebook to a fresh page, wrote, Week 2 complete. Cohort assessment updated. Petier Solano adapts under pressure, responds to direct honesty, capable of changing pattern when previous pattern fails. Potential is significant. She paused, wrote, He'll be ready in about 6 months. She closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and somewhere in the dark, 47 star systems worth of military academies and tactical analysts and deployment briefing officers went about their business, mostly unaware of what Earth was quietly, methodically, and with characteristic understatement, building. Whatever came next, humanity was already prepared for it. They always were.